COVID-19 cases continue to rise in many areas across the country. Provincial governments are taking increased measures to limit the spread of the virus, but there's talk that perhaps the federal government may take over the pandemic response. To talk about this in more detail is one of our regular contributors, Brian Lilley of the Toronto Sun. Now, Brian, not every province is the same. Isn't a patchwork approach, as Alberta Premier Jason Kenney referred to, maybe a little more practical?
Well, it absolutely is. And despite the fact that there are a lot of media calls for this and a lot of people who are allied with the Prime Minister calling for this, thankfully, he's not. And, I can point to a lot of reasons why there shouldn't be. The patchwork approach, obviously, is something that even the Prime Minister referenced. He said it depends on what part of the country you're in terms of how we're responding to COVID-19. And I can point to your province in Alberta where at different points in time, Calgary and Edmonton, which have been the hot spots. I know you've had some problems in Brooks. I know you've had some problems elsewhere, and those have been treated differently than areas where there is little to no COVID-19. Well, consider the vastness of Canada. Then you consider the fact that the federal government has absolutely no capacity to run a healthcare system in any single province, never mind 10 provinces and 3 territories. They're just simply not able to do it. They also don't have the ability to step in and start managing the school systems. The school systems are they're an integral part to how we manage COVID-19. So are workplaces, which requires the Provincial Ministry of Labor to step in and do inspections. Are you following the rules at your workplace, be it a meatpacking plant or a transportation unit or a school or any type of industrial establishment, the construction site across the street from me? Are they following the rules? The federal government is not equipped to do this. But I could also point to how the fact that whether it's getting rid of the National Emergency Strategic Stockpile, getting rid of the Global Public Health Intelligence Network, the fact that they didn't deal with the border quickly enough, the federal government has not dealt with their part of COVID-19 very well. So for them to step in and say, we're going to take over, would be the height of hubris. Again, I want to say, thankfully, the Prime Minister, even in his news conference on Tuesday, said, this is not something that we're looking at doing. We're not looking at bringing in the Emergency Measures Act. But a lot of his allies are still saying, this is the only way that we will beat this in Canada.
There were 2 announcements over the past couple of weeks of new COVID-19 vaccines coming our way, Brian. One from Pfizer and now another from Moderna. Public health officials say, however, that the delivery of the vaccine is still a number of months away. Why the delay?
Well, because they're not through clinical trials yet. And, quite frankly, both companies announced their results for their vaccine trials, not through a peer-reviewed journal, which is a normal way of dealing with such things in the medical community, but through a press release. So yes, these results look promising, but they have not been vetted by anybody. They have not been vetted by Public Health Agency of Canada. They have not been vetted by the FDA in the United States. They have not been vetted by their peers who could look and say, all right, did Pfizer or Moderna meet the standard of how you need to test these things? That hasn't happened yet. So if that happens, and let's hope that it does, okay, I want to be very clear. I want these vaccines to work. I want them to be available quickly. But even if they do, it will be months and months away. The Pfizer vaccine in particular is problematic. Both vaccines require 2 shots, weeks apart. But the Pfizer vaccine, you require deep freeze. Not just the idea that it's got to be kept in a freezer like any of us might have in our homes. No, we're talking minus 75. So, almost what you put Walt Disney or Han Solo in to freeze them to come back to life later on. These are not readily available. The federal government has started to try and procure such devices, and they're also looking at bringing in the military to help distribute them. Now, for people that are starting to freak out, this is not about the military trying to round you up and shove a needle in your arm. The military is good at one thing. Well, they're good at many things, but one thing in particular, logistics. They know how to make things appear on time. It's part of what they do. So there's a lot of steps between now in when any of us may see a vaccine. So I think that we're going to be into March or April at the earliest before we're seeing widespread vaccine use in Canada, but it could be much later.
As discussions continue about how we can limit the spread of the novel coronavirus, comes word that some are upset at what they are seeing as politicians canceling Christmas. Come on, Brian. No one can cancel Christmas.
Oh, no, you can't cancel Christmas. Christmas, was it the Grinch? Like Christmas comes whether you want it to or not. It's coming. And you can go through and you can steal every toy, you can steal every decoration, but all the who's in Whoville will show up and celebrate Christmas anyway. So, look, politicians can't cancel it. There have been a couple of comments. I know Ontario Premier Doug Ford was asked about people having large gatherings at Christmas, and he warned against it and said, look, please don't. And there's going to be more Christmases down the road. A lot of people got offended at that. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said Christmas won't be quite the same this year. A lot of people getting offended at that. Look, as a practicing Christian, as a bad Catholic, Christmas is not about parties. It is not even the holiest day of the year. That would be Easter. Ask any Christian. Christmas is very special, but without the resurrection, the birth of Jesus doesn't mean a whole lot. So we made it through Easter in the middle of a lockdown. We can make it through Christmas when we're not in a lockdown. But if you need to have 50 people in your house to have Christmas, you're probably not celebrating it right.
While Prime Minister Trudeau is not trying to cancel Christmas, Brian, many are asking if he's trying to fundamentally change Canada and use the pandemic maybe as an excuse. Is Trudeau joining other world leaders on this great reset initiative or the new world economic order? Many are concerned about that.
Well, strangely enough, he is, which is bizarre, because, as you and I talked about several weeks ago, remember, all through the summer, Liberals were bending reporters' ears everywhere. Oh, we're going to use this pandemic to remake Canada. We're going to use this for fundamentally changing the country. And then they realized that was not doing well in focus group tests. Average Canadians were looking at this and saying, what are you talking about? So by the time the throne speech came on September 23rd, they'd backed away from that and said, oh, no, we're just focused on the pandemic. We're just focused on our number one job, which is what Canadians want every government focused on. 6 days after the throne speech, September 29th, the Prime Minister speaking to a meeting of the United Nations, side meeting, and he starts talking about how this pandemic is a chance for a reset, that we can use Agenda 2030, which used to be called, back when I was discussing it in Sun News days, as Agenda 21. Now, this all sounds like something that Dr. Evil would discuss with Austin Powers in a bad B movie. It's real. These are real things. The Great Reset is something that the World Economic Forum has discussed. They've got a book out. They've got a series of talks. They've got a podcast, a series of discussions to figure out how to change the world economy using the pandemic. Agenda 2030 is all about using the environment to implement socialism. And the Prime Minister's talking about both of them in the same breath. So yes, a lot of people worried. Look, there are conspiracy theories out there. I'll warn you to be careful looking these things up on the internet and going down rabbit holes. That doesn't mean that they're not real and that we shouldn't be concerned about world leaders, including our own Prime Minister, trying to say they want to use a pandemic that has claimed more than 10,000 lives as a way to reshape our economy. That's not what I expect of the Prime Minister. That's not what any Canadian should expect of the Prime Minister in the middle of a pandemic.
Business owners have been receiving some much needed help from Ottawa during the pandemic, Brian. Now, you've been following the wage and rent subsidy bill as it makes its way through Parliament, and you say the Liberals made a mess of this due to the We Charity scandal?
Unfortunately, yes, We Charity does tie into this. Look, the wage subsidy, if you remember back in the spring, they originally said we'll make it 10%. And the Conservatives and the NDP, you got the left and the right both saying, no, you got to make it 75 or people will be unemployed. And the Liberals said, no, we'll make it 10%. Eventually, they realized the error of their ways. They made it 75. The new wage subsidy bill makes it up to 65%, but under certain conditions. A lot of businesses are saying this is not helpful. On the wage subsidy side, back in the spring, they made it so that landlords had to apply, not a business. A landlord had to apply, and a lot of them just said, we're not going to. You can't pay your rent, you can't pay your rent. Well, that left businesses in the lurch. It took months for the federal government to realize that this was a problem. They brought in a new rent subsidy bill on November 2nd. Now remember, they knew about this in the summer. They prorogued the House they prorogued Parliament on August 18th because of the WE scandal. On November 2nd, they bring in the bill. They didn't send it to the Finance Committee where opposition MPs could move a motion to amend the bill. They sent it to what's called the Committee of the Whole. That means they're meeting in the whole of Parliament. The opposition can't amend the bill in the same way. I'm sorry to get too far into the weeds. But the reason they sent it to the Committee of the Whole is because the Liberals were filibustering the Finance Committee over releasing WE documents. They missed a major error in their bill, and that is that a business that is shut down due to the pandemic, due to public health measures, has to pay their rent in full before they can get money from the government.
Wow.
You know, can you imagine telling average Canadians you got to pay your rent in full before you can get the CERB? You know, if you don't show us you paid your rent, Hal, you're not getting a penny of CERB. That would have been denounced. Well, they realized their error too late. They had to pass the bill as it was, send it to the Senate, and hope that the Senate will fix it and send it back to the House of Commons. That's delaying it by a couple of weeks. You know, it's been a disaster beginning to end.
COVID-19 has really changed the way many of us work, including making video conference calls like we do at Bridge City News every day through Zoom. It's like a standard part of our lives now. Now, it's also led to some embarrassing moments for some people who've been using video conferencing, and that includes a Liberal cabinet minister caught talking about her income, and she got the number wrong?
Yeah, she doesn't even know what she makes. Like, okay, let's be honest. Maryam Monsef did not make the worst Zoom mistake of 2020. There's a lot of big candidates for that we probably don't want to talk about on this broadcast. They're not family friendly. But you've got a Liberal MP joining the House of Commons virtually, and they call out, the Speaker stands up and says, they actually called out for Jody Wilson-Raybould, the former Attorney General who's now an independent. She was the next to speak. The Speaker calls for her, but Maryam Monsef has not turned off her mic, the Minister for International Development, and she's caught slouching in her chair going, like, what do I make? Like $250? Okay, one, you sound silly. You sound like a teenage girl talking about going out on your date this weekend. But also, no, you make $270 plus all your perks, plus your car and driver, plus your rental allowance, plus. It was an embarrassing moment for her and proof that she's not worth the $270,000 that we're paying her. Why don't we just give her the difference between the $250 and the $270 and see if she'll still do the job?
Sometimes I think I should really run as an MP, you know? Before I let you go, we got a couple of minutes left here. Let's talk about a recent tweet from U.S. President Donald Trump where he referenced Elections Canada. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, it's probably not the response Elections Canada was going for. If you've been following the controversy about the U.S. election, you know that a Canadian company is front and center in it. It's a company called Dominion Voting System, and they provide software and machinery to count ballots, including in many of the contentious states, be it Michigan, I believe they're used in Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada. And people are saying, oh, this company's software, it allowed folks to manipulate the system and change ballots. Well, that led to people in Canada saying, wait a minute, did we use that in our last Canadian election? Is that why Justin Trudeau is prime minister? Is that they used bad software? So Elections Canada put out a tweet basically saying, we use paper ballots, we count them by hand under scrutineers. And Donald Trump retweeted it and said, I believe something to the effect of, this is how it should be, or this is exactly it. I don't think that's what Elections Canada wanted to happen, but it does show like the integrity of our system. Or even in many of the municipal elections that I've covered, where they do use voting machines, it's a paper ballot, you fill it in by hand, the machine counts it, but it captures the paper ballot there for any recount. The United States has some weird systems that lead to every 4 years, these arguments and fights. I think that maybe they should start looking at Elections Canada and saying, how do you guys do it? Maybe we'll copy you.
You know what I think is interesting as well is the fact that Trump actually follows Elections Canada on Twitter. Who would have thunk it, right?
I don't follow Elections Canada on Twitter.
One of our regular contributors, Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.